Hello fellow Gwent players, and welcome to my favorite design cards in the game. So for this video, I'm looking at my personal favorite design. So this is a subjective opinion. You can obviously disagree with me because a lot of these cards are a bit questionable or toxic, one might say. And I'm only going to do one card per faction. That also includes neutrals, so that you guys can also tell me your favorite designs in the comments, and that maybe in the future I can do another video like this where I talk about, more card designs that I really like in this game. So without further ado, let's just start with neutrals. For neutrals, I have Regis. Deploy damage all units on an enemy roll by 1. Initiative, if anywhere destroyed, repeat this ability. Now this card used to not have initiative, and basically would be like a board wipe. It required quite a lot of setup because it also required a long round and some sort of damage and movement to sort of force the opponent on the other side of the row. And before the initiative, this was one of the most unique sort of win conditions that existed in the game. The best synergies it had was with spies, because you could put like 1-point spying units and like 2-point spying units on one row and then basically wipe those out with Regis, which was a really powerful combo. But then they obviously gave it initiative, and it was a lot harder to sort of set up like 5s and 4s during the same turn, or like just move the cards with things like guerrilla tactics as well, which was also a deck that was able to play Regis. And I feel like if they do drop the initiative off this card, I don't think it's going to be that problematic. Like, there is a good amount of swarm going around, but then there's also decks that really don't swarm at all. So Regis is still like a matchup dependent card, but if you play him right or time him right, he can be incredibly impactful in a lot of games. And it is a very unique win condition in Gwent that your opponent does realize when it's happening, and you sort of have to play around the fact that the opponent is slowly and steadily realizing that the Regis will get a lot of value. And that's why I really love the design of Regis, is just because he's that unique win condition. Now, I'm not sure if you guys agree with this, but I do feel like before the initiative, this was one of the coolest sort of cards that existed in the game. And for monsters, we have CARANTHIR. Deploy spawn a 1 power-based copy of a monster unit in your hand on this row. Now, this card used to also do neutrals, but then they kind of nerfed it because it was a bit too overpowered with cards like Ethereal, but then they also nerfed Ethereal, so that was kind of a weird sequence of events. But now it's only able to sort of spawn 1 power-based copies of monsters, and even then, that is pretty cool sort of flexibility, because you can do this for engines like the Beast or the Empyrean, or just like Slizards, or I don't know, like any possible thing. Or you could also do it with Death Wish cards like Ruahin, Detlaf, Maruna, Manticore, Penitent. Those are all really, really cool cards that this works with. Also, there's the Kiki Queen synergy that this card has, where it immediately triggers the Thrive on the Kiki Queen, immediately boosting all your drones on the row by 1. So this card has so many sort of cool ideas and synergies within monsters, and it kind of is sort of like a cheat card within monsters, where it basically allows you to replay a card. And the fact that it does exist in something like monsters doesn't make it as toxic, because monsters doesn't have these sort of super scary engines where you're thinking that if he has 2 of these, it's really, really scary. Like, Ruahin is scary if your opponent has 2 of, but then it still has an entire like deck building cost where you have to play a ridiculous amount of consume to sort of get the super value off of the Ruahin. And yeah, that's why I really like CARANTHIR. He just gives you so many sort of deck building options with him, and like card options. But the thing is, you can't slot him into every deck. You can only slot him into certain decks where you play for his gimmick, or where you play for the extra greed on certain cards. And that's why I really, really love this card design for monsters, and in general, just a really, really cool ability. And for Nilfgaard, we have Vilgefortz. Deploy melee, destroy an enemy unit, then your opponent summons the top unit from their deck to a random enemy row. Deploy range, destroy an allied unit, then summon the top unit from your deck to a random allied row. Now, this was really difficult for Nilfgaard, because Nilfgaard has some of the coolest designed cards like Letho, Vatier, etc, etc. There's just so many to count. But I feel like Vilgefortz has this very basicness to him, but also has that flexibility to him that makes him a really cool card. Also, I really like the card art on this, and I just love playing with this card, because when it drops, it just feels so powerful. And the thing is, like, you can also really set this up nicely with cards like Cynthia, Courier, where you put cards on your opponent's top of the deck and just basically make your Vilgefortz multi-value. But you can also like play Vilgefortz like on random cards like Defenders if you don't have a Purify or a Vincent, or just like poisons for the defender, you can just basically get rid of that defender with the Vilgefortz. It also can just destroy any sort of like win conditions, like, I don't know, a dagger or a Visigoda without really too much trouble. But then he also kind of has a downside where if you didn't set up the Vilgefortz beforehand, your opponent can also like summon a really powerful card like a defender or like, I don't know, like a war elephant, something like along those lines, or like a big point sort of unit, like a Goliath maybe, where you're thinking, okay, maybe it wasn't worth to kill that unit. And so the card also always has a risk on the melee ability. With the ranged ability, this is really cool in decks like Hyper Thin, where this card really shines, where if your opponent doesn't play too tall, you can just like destroy your own units and try and get the Tibor out. If you thinned your deck well enough, you should always get the Tibor out with Vilgefortz by destroying sort of like a 3-point Yennefer or like a 4-point unit if that's the lowest point unit, and then you just play for additional value. Also, you can sort of put the Tibor on top of your deck with leader abilities like Imperial Formation or the Tactical Decision or Courier yet again, where you can manipulate your deck to the point where Tibor will always be the top card that Vilgefortz gets out if you destroy an allied unit. And that flexibility and sort of like variety that the card has really makes me just love this card. It's so cool to just play, to look at, but it's not auto-include in Nilfgaard, obviously. There's just better cards like Invo or Vincent that sort of do the same thing without that much of a downside. But Vilgefortz is just so awesome. I just love that design of him, of like the flexibility of being able to destroy your own units as well. Just gives him that extra edge that I really love. And for Northern Realms, we actually have a bronze card, and that is KAEDWENI Revenant. Order damage a unit by 1, Deathblow spawn a base copy of KAEDWENI Revenant, and summon it to this row. Now, why is there a bronze card in this list? Well, the reason is, the one thing I do not enjoy about Homecoming compared to open beta Gwent is that bronze cards aren't that great. Like, they're kind of just filler cards in a lot of situations where you're just trying to get the most points out of your bronze cards. Whereas KAEDWENI Revenant is an actual card that you build your deck around, and your entire strategy revolves around the fact that this card is one of the most powerful engines in the game. Because it's not easy to set up, you also have to have a deck building cost for it, where you need to have certain damage cards or like a lot of sort of control cards to play around cards like Defender, or just like tall punishes if the opponent plays a bit too tall for this to sort of get value out of it. And then there's also cards like Draug or Forbidden Magic that work with the design of this card, because the design of this card is really unique. For a bronze card to have such an impact on games is really cool, and is something I would like to see more in Homecoming Gwent, or just in Gwent in general. But it's also understandable why they can't really do that, because these cheap cards shouldn't really have that much of an impact compared to gold cards, which, you know, have a higher provision cost or like deck building cost. So like smashing like 5 provision cards which have the same value as a gold card, it's a bit risky. But for this card, it makes sense because it's quite easily removable. And that's why you have to sort of play your deck around as many engines to be able to set this up, or to also be able to play as many of this card as possible. And that's why KAEDWENI Revenant is such a cool card, because it's actually a bronze card that is also your win condition. And that's very uncommon in Homecoming Gwent, or in Gwent in general right now. And that's why I really enjoy this card. Now, Scoia'tael, I'm gonna have a lot of people disagree with me here, but SCHIRRU is definitely my favorite design card in Scoia'tael. Zeal, order, destroy self and all other units with the same power. So basically, this is like a Scorch that can sort of set its power to which sort of units you want to destroy. You can set this up with hand buff cards like Circle of Life. You can set this up with cards like Isengrim's Council, which would put this immediately to a 5-point unit. You can also use leader abilities like Precision Strike, make it really nice to set this card up against sort of swarmy cards. But then the card also has certain downside matchups where the card can't really get that much value because the opponent might be going a bit taller than usual on certain cards. But I feel like the design of the card makes it just feel so special because it's not actually a unit, because it destroys itself. It feels like a special card that you can sort of interact with. And that's really cool. It's like a better version of artifacts in general, because artifacts are just completely uninteractive. Whereas this card you can set up with boosts, damage, or like self-damage. I don't think there's a self-damage card in Scoia'tael, but like Precision Strike can damage its own units, obviously. And then the card becomes like its own unique sort of strategy. It's also a really cool anti-meta card if the meta becomes a bit too mid-rangey. And when I say mid-rangey, I mean like a lot of like 5-point, 4-point units that just have good deploy abilities. This card will destroy those metas single-handedly and help you just like gain a lot of MMR by just having a strategy based around this card. And the flavor of the card is also so unique because it just works with how the card looks and like how the card feels. And it's just such a nice card. Just watching a solid like 20-point SCHIRRU board wipe is always so satisfying. And yeah, that's why I love SCHIRRU, and that's why it's my favorite Scoia'tael card, design-wise. It's not my favorite card in Scoia'tael. My favorite card in Scoia'tael is Aglace, but you guys probably already know that. Now for Skellige, another controversial one, it's Lippy. The play range, swap your graveyard with your deck. Now, I know Lippy's hated, because it's one of the most brain-dead decks in the game. But the fact that he exists, and the fact that he has such an interesting deck-building cost, I just love that design because Skellige in general has really boring design across the faction, apart from cards like Artist or like the whole sort of self-damage archetype, which, let's be real, just gets carried by scenario anyway these days. This card is a unique ability that really works well with Skellige and the tools that it has at hand. Because you have to sort of thin your deck as efficient as possible with cards like Burn a Brand or Ceres, so that you can get as many sort of powerful cards in your graveyard for you to then play the Lippy with cards like Roach or Knickers as well that also come out with the Lippy again because they go back into your deck. And then you just like replay your strategy again. It's such a dumb idea. It's such a dumb strategy. But I just love it. I don't know why I love it so much. It's just so good. You can very much compare this to something like Pavetta, but Pavetta doesn't really have as much sort of risk as Lippy. Like you playing Pavetta, you usually only have one target, which could be Dun Banners or obviously Commandos. But Lippy puts your entire graveyard back into your deck and your entire deck back into your graveyard. Like the card has a huge risk. But it's so cool, the fact that it has that risk and it relies on you obviously drawing perfectly. Like there is the unbeatable Lippy hands that happens if you do get the wrong coin. And that's obviously frustrating to play against, but that doesn't take away how unique and sort of like cool this design is on a card that exists in a faction as boring as Skellige. And for Syndicate, we have Igor the Hook. Insanity, fee 5, spawn and summon a base copy of a bronze allied unit to Igor's row. Cooldown 1. So this card used to be one of the most hated cards in the game when this didn't have cooldown 1, and Line Pockets was one of the most broken leader abilities. But now it's kind of more toned down and it plays for its sort of unique win condition, where cards like Townsfolk or Tax Collector or even the Fallen Knights have some really interesting synergies with the Igor, because like Revenants, this is a card that supports bronzes. And what I love in Gwent is when certain cards make bronzes better, like Portal or Amphibious Assault are cards that really do that incredibly well. Igor doesn't do it as well as Portal and Amphibious Assault, obviously, but it still does it to an extent where it doesn't feel too broken nowadays. It used to feel broken. With the cooldown 1, that you're able to do it once per turn, and you really have to like strategize with this card. You do need a long round for this card, which is pretty much its detriment as to why it's kind of a meme card nowadays. But when this card pops off and isn't dealt with, this card is ridiculously powerful and can create a huge amount of value with certain strategies that I've mentioned earlier, like Townsfolk, Fallen Knight, even Cut Up Lackeys. This is quite fun to play with. And it allows for so much like fun in the game. Like it allows you to just have fun with certain strategies and not like take the game too serious. It is quite frustrating if he dies a lot, but when he works, it's just so satisfying to pull it off. And I just love the way it's designed. Also with the Insanity, which basically allows you to just get your first sort of like spawn for free. It's obviously then more vulnerable, but then you have like Defender, Azar-Javed to sort of protect this. Also Azar-Javed sort of limits this because it spawns 3 units on your row, but then your opponent obviously kills off the Scarabs slowly and steadily. And yeah, just like spawning, I don't know, like 2 Townsfolk with this is incredibly powerful alone, especially with the strategy that you're usually playing with Townsfolk. Now, me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Syndicate, but the fact that this card like works so well with the fee ability, and the fee ability being 5 just makes it really balanced and such. it's just such a unique card effect in the game that it just like, it feels really, really cool to play. And I really, really like this card design, and that's why it's my favorite card design in Syndicate. And yeah, that was my sort of top 1 favorite card designs of each of the factions. Some of them aren't like the number 1. There's obviously a lot of discrepancies in things like Nilfgaard. I just wanted to give you like my personal like feelings on these cards and why I like them and why I do enjoy playing them. I mean, some of the choices might be controversial to you, like SCHIRRU and LIPPY, and I do understand why people don't like these cards. They are pretty dumb if they are sort of meta, and the strategies that sometimes are played with them are a bit degenerate, but like you can't take away that these designs are unique for a game like Gwent that's just like damage and boost based technically. And all these cards have this sort of unique feeling when you play for them. And that's why I love all the cards that I've listed today. Now I'm curious to see what your guys' favorite designs are in the game. I will definitely make another one of these. I really do like talking about card design and which card designs I like. I think the next video is going to be more about like basic designs like Dim and Light Longship, which is one of my favorite bronze designs in the game because it synergizes with the faction and what the faction stands for so well. Where cards like that exist in the game that do very basic things, but really, really sort of tie a lot of the sort of synergies within the faction together. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little discussion video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe for more Gwent content, and I'll see you soon.